So a few weeks ago, you saw stage 1 of the suspension upgrade as part of the Ultimate Tow Rig series here with Grey Wolf 1, where we used pre-owned Ford F-150 Tremor suspension components to achieve an overall increase in ride height at the arguably most cost-effective or cost-conscious way of doing so. The total cost was $700 Canadian, and we achieved a 1-inch increase in ride height for the front and a 0.75 real-world ride height increase in the rear. For why I say real-world increase in ride height, I encourage you to go watch that episode. However, we have new goals. So hello and welcome back to the Grey Wolf RV YouTube channel, and welcome to stage 2 of the suspension upgrade as part of the Ultimate Tow Rig series. And for stage 2, we have 2 specific goals in mind. First and foremost, adjustable ride height. But more importantly, we are looking for improved damping characteristics for towing and hauling. Now that said, we are looking to do this as cost effectively as possible. So we haven't gone out and bought the top of the line products just to achieve those 2 goals. At the same time, I'm also breaking the one rule that I had for this entire series, which is not going back or not compromising from the previous stage. However, we're going to get into that a little bit later. For now, let's talk about the components for stage 2. So for stage 2, we are going to be using Bilstein 5100s, both front and rear. Now, total parts cost is going to be approximately $900 Canadian, and I specify parts cost for a reason because you'll probably notice this looks quite different from that. And that is because the 5100s reuse the spring and top hat from your original strut assembly. So these are the original struts that came out of Grey Wolf 1. These have that 553-pound spring, and we are also going to be reusing this top hat assembly as well. So while the total parts cost might actually not be that different from the pre-owned Tremor suspension, what is different is the labor costs. So transferring a spring over is honestly really highly dangerous. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that yourself, then you're looking at shop rate, which, can and will be anywhere between like 150 and 175 Canadian per hour. So that is kind of a hidden cost associated. So if you just have these in your online shopping cart, then be forewarned that there will be some additional labor costs involved. So let's talk about pros and cons. And for that, I'm going to use my cheat sheet here. So first and foremost, these have 5 positions of ride height adjustability. And you achieve that by moving this circlip across these 5 positions. So from stock, 0.8, 1.25, etc., etc. And this simply increases the preload on the spring to determine the overall ride height. Second, Bilstein uses a digressive piston and valve inside the shock body itself. We will get into talking about what exactly digressive valving is later. Bilstein also uses vehicle-specific valving. So unlike a generic valving, which may not take into accountability what the intended spring rate is, these are valved vehicle-specific. Something else to note about Bilstein is they have OE quality and reliability because, quite frankly, they are actually an OE supplier on a lot of vehicles. In fact, I think the Ford Bronco uses their yellow body shock. Something else to note is that the overall shock is very simple. There is no external adjustability, less moving this ring. And again, this is not something that you're going to do. This is a one-time kind of set it and forget it. So there's nothing on the outside to confuse anybody. Generally speaking, you install it and then you drive it for the life of the shock. Arguably a subjective point is they look quite good. I love the brushed steel body. In fact, I am actually going to take the opportunity, I think, to add a little bit of Cerakoting onto this just to keep it looking good for as long as possible. But I like the silver and what will be a black spring. To each their own, but compared to some other brands with proprietary colorways, I think this is quite neutral. And again, looks quite good in my eyes. And last but not least is affordability. Now, once more, affordability is always going to be subjective, but relative to the aftermarket shocks, these are arguably the most affordable at $250 Canadian each for the front and $200 each for the rear. So $250, $250, $500 for the front, 2 and 2, $400 for the rear. Total parts cost again, $900. As for cons, well, unfortunately, these are not a rebuildable shock. You're not going to find that until you're probably twice the cost of this shock and then up. So once these shocks do wear out, they will be unfortunately set for the landfill. I would love for that to be different, but such is the case, and manufacturers need to account for rebuildability in the overall design, and so that will then in turn drive up the price point. Secondly, just like they are simple and there's no external adjustments, so too it is that there are no external adjustments. And there are lots of aftermarket shocks at higher price points again that have external adjustability. So that is maybe a con, but again, relative to this price point, I'm not aware of anybody else that has external adjustability, at least not that which is useful. Words. And again, as already mentioned, these reutilize the spring and top hat from your original damper. So if for whatever reason you no longer have the spring and top hat, or they're damaged, then you will have to go out and seek replacements. Moreover, there is that added cost in either labor or specialty tools, more specifically a spring compressor, to be able to do that job yourself. So let's take a look at what's actually included with the front dampers. So as mentioned, there is already this circlip that is attached. Now it was in its lowest position, and I've already gone ahead and moved it up to the middle position, which is where we're going to be installing it. There is this collet here. This simply slides over the shock body and it sits down on top of that ring. Over top of that, we have the lower shock mount. And then we have this nylon, I'm going to call it a bushing, and that simply snaps into place. In fact, let me just take that out now and we can simply go ahead and do it. Boom, there we go. So that will sit over top. Now we have some hardware. So what's really cool about these is, unlike the original dampers that have the studs permanently pressed in it, which make your life a fun having type moment, these are bolts and nuts. Up here, we can see that we have a new nut and washer. Now, to better understand what digressive valving is all about and why it's of benefit to us, I'm going to spin you around and we're going to have a little bit of a whiteboard session. So within suspension damping, there are two main categories: compression and rebound. Compression is when the shock is getting shorter or compressing. Rebound is when the shock is extending or getting longer or rebounding. Now, most likely in the automotive world, you're going to encounter low speed compression and high speed compression, as well as rebound. But unfortunately, rebound adjustment is really, really uncommon. I'm only aware of one, potentially two manufacturers of those products. I say unfortunately because rebound is actually what is going to prevent the rear axle from bucking forward, but that's kind of a rant for a different day. Now, low speed compression refers to the shock shaft speed, not the vehicle speed. And the best way to think of low speed compression is the vehicle's input onto the road. So I do this motion because one common input that a vehicle has on the road is body roll or lean. And that becomes more pronounced when you start increasing the weight, the ride height, or the center of gravity of the vehicle. As it applies to us, low speed compression is what's going to support vehicles that have been lifted in ride height because there's more leverage on the suspension. It's also going to help support vehicles with added weight, so think rooftop tents, and especially with like bed campers where you've moved not only that weight but also that center of gravity up really high. A high amount of low speed compression is going to be very stiff at both low and high vehicle speeds, and you may not want that. High speed, on the other hand, refers to a high shaft speed of the damper, which that can be achieved at low vehicle speeds or is arguably most common at high vehicle speeds. At low vehicle speeds, you might hit a very square-edged pothole when you're driving through it, and that square edge is going to cause that suspension to compress very rapidly. Likewise, if you're driving down a gravel road quite fast with like a lot of washboard and potholes, those are going to be impacting the suspension at, again, very high rates of speed, and thus that is high speed compression damping. So I asked our friend ChatGPT to come up with this graph here displaying a digressive valving characteristic, and we're going to try to put all the pieces together. So along the y-axis, or the vertical, we have damping. The higher up, the more damping, or the more resistant that shock is to inputs. Along the bottom, we have shaft speed. So again, at this end of the spectrum is low or slow shaft speed, so that would be your low speed compression damping. At the other end, high shaft speed, thus high speed compression damping. Now, displayed here is a digressive valving characteristic, where the actual rate of increase is quite steep initially, and then it levels off, and thus the digressive, which means digressive dampers are going to have lots of low speed compression damping, which is going to help, as mentioned, stability with lifted vehicles, with higher center of gravity, and it's also going to help give kind of a sportier handling characteristic, which can sometimes be, let's say, the Achilles heel or a criticism of Bilstein dampers that use digressive valving. As shock speeds increase, which usually coincides with an increase in vehicle speed, say going down a rough road quite quickly, then the valves are already quite stiff, and at that point it levels off and it maintains that stiffness and increases at a much slower, more predictable rate. Now I'm going to go ahead and overlay what a linear valving graph would look like, and also a progressive valving graph. And different manufacturers use these different damping profiles to achieve and target arguably different audiences. But for us, in our use case scenario, towing Grey Wolf 2 and hauling cargo in the back, we want an increase in that low speed compression damping, because as we go over undulations and bumps on the roadway, then you can get that sort of porpoising. Well, increasing the low speed compression damping is going to help be supportive to the trailer and not causing excess amounts of compression in our rear suspension. So that's enough in the tech department. If you have any questions, just let me know in the comments down below. For now, I'm going to go ahead and get this installed, and then we're going to take it out for a drive, and I'm going to share with you my ride impressions of the 5100s compared to the Tremor suspension, which arguably I should have done in that first video, but well, we're here now anyways. So, all right, let's go do it. So, you may have noticed I am sitting in the passenger seat of my truck, which doesn't make me nervous at all, but we have a driver. So,
hello.
This is Kathy Goes Camping, aka Mom, and my mom also owns a Ford F-150, so she's kind of like my baseline metric. And what do you know that has been done? I know you know it's been lifted, but in terms of the suspension, do you know, have I told you anything specifically about it?
Probably, but I just know it's a lifted suspension, and it's supposed to be a little firmer, I think.
Okay, all right, that's fair. So I just want, like, from a disclosure
Yes.
perspective, so that people know if you're like reading into something or whatever. So you know the route, so
Yep.
I'll let you start driving, and I just want you to articulate like what you're feeling, what you think. Yeah.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
All right, here we go. So far, I don't feel a big difference from my 2018 F-150. Okay, gone over a few bumps. I do feel like I'm sitting up higher.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here comes a bit of a divot. Let's see what we feel there. It's a smoother ride.
Smoother. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I don't feel like it sinks down and then pops up. It just feels consistent.
Okay.
All right, let's come up here to some speed bumps, see what it feels like.
So have you just take this at the normal pace that you normally would drive?
Okay, so it's a parking lot. This is what I would do, and I would brake before the speed bump.
Okay.
I mean, you can feel you're going over the speed bump, but there's no bouncing or anything like that.
Okay. Does it feel harsh?
No.
No. Doesn't it's not like your spine's compressing or anything like that?
No. No, it feels like I'm going over a speed bump, but it's not jarring or anything. Here comes another one.
Would you say it's as comfortable, more comfortable, less comfortable than your truck?
That's a good question.
Or just different?
It's different.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have you make a right here.
Okay. Feels good. Feels like a bump, but there's no bounce down, bounce up. But it's not hard and jarring.
No. Actually, if you want, just pull up in behind Canadian Tire there, like at the far end. All right, I am back in the driver's seat, and I found it interesting how my mom found that it was neither worse nor better, just different. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment because it doesn't compromise any of the drive characteristics or qualities that you want. I honestly kind of equate it to as if you went through the steering and suspension components on, Grey Wolf here has 125,000 kilometers, and you basically put all new parts in it. So it feels more direct and connected and taut than it does sort of like stiff or anything like that. That said, she did seem to pick up on the significantly improved rebound damping, and I 100% agree with that. You go over a bump, whether it's a speed bump or a dip in the road, it's one and done. However, what surprised me the most is actually the compression damping. Even though the rebound damping is significantly better than the baseline, I honestly didn't have high expectations for the compression damping because these are, after all, a entry-level 2-inch series shock absorber. Again, it was purchased knowing that it's a digressive valving, but not necessarily that I can go and hit speed bumps doing 30 kilometers an hour, which you can. Not to say that you should be doing that, but it is certainly possible. So what it has done for me is honestly make me really excited about what a mid or high-end tier suspension can actually do in terms of shock damping. And I'm reminded of the Bilstein Shock Talk podcast, where in one episode, one of the three hosts was saying how sometimes people use larger tire sizes as sort of a compensation or a crutch to be able to, do spirited off-road driving. And I think it was Junior, he had said, look, just pick whatever tire size you want, put on a set of their 8112s, which is the highest end automotive consumer shock absorber that they make, and then just go and impress everybody around you. Now, I should also note, I have not towed yet with the Bilstein 5100s. That would have made for a nice complete round video, but due to extraneous circumstances outside of this video in, I don't know, I guess YouTube land, that has not happened. So this is a cheeky ploy to suggest maybe you stick around and subscribe if you found your way here because you're interested in the Bilstein 5100s on an F-150 or as it is for towing. But there is a trip coming up, and yeah, I will most certainly make a point to add my 2 cents in commentary on how they perform in that application. Now, how do these compare to the tremor suspension that we did? In truth, I did actually forget to do drive impressions, even though I meant to. Such is life. Nevertheless, we're here now. The tremor suspension was an excellent learning opportunity because my greatest takeaway was how damping is so much more important than spring rate. As we know, those trimmer dampers achieve their 1-inch front height lift increase, words, vis-a-vis a higher spring rate. We're assuming a 600 pounds per inch spring rate compared to the 553s, which came factory in Grove 1 here. And because of that higher spring rate, one would assume that the tremor dampers would have had less compression damping, so it wasn't stiff compression damping on top of a stiff spring. But because there's more energy potential in that higher spring, especially when it's rebounding, you would therefore need more rebound damping or control, let's say. I did not find that to be the case. In fact, I found that both on the compression and rebound side of the tremor suspension, it felt very open. So the way that I can kind of equate it to is as if you were driving like a heavy duty. Now, being somewhat of a Ford guy, I equate it to driving like a Super Duty, which has very stiff springs, and to keep from that compounding effect, Ford often and does include very, in my opinion, open dampers where there's not a lot of damping either on the compression side or on the rebound side, and you're actually just kind of riding around on the springs. Now, in a Super Duty, you need those stiff springs for the payload. You don't necessarily need it in a F-150 application. There are ways around, let's say, higher spring rate, but that's for a conversation and a video in the future. So going back to that 553 pound spring rate, significantly improved the overall ride quality. Not to mention we were able to achieve all of our objectives for our particular use case scenario, most notably increase in ride height through the spring preload. We now have a digressive valving for towing, etc., etc. So if you are towing a trailer with any sort of general degree of regularity, maybe you want to refresh your vehicle and you aren't quite sure, maybe you have no interest in trailers and you just simply found used F-150 and Bilstein 5100 as your search criteria, hello and welcome. Yeah, I could not be happier with the end result. In fact, they impressed me more than they thought. So as we get back into town here, I will wrap up by saying thank you as always for watching. If you found this video helpful and informative in any way, please click that thumb up button. It simply tells the YouTube algorithm to share this video with other people. And if you aren't already subscribed yet and you want to see if there's a stage 3, which I will tell you right now there will be, when I'm not sure, as is often things in life, money plays a role, but yes, there will be a stage 3. So till then, we'll see you next week. You take care, and bye for now.